coming. It's hard to come to these things after drinking and watching 8 hours of panels, but I assure you this will be the high point of your day, I promise. So in one of the panels, a really great one, somebody said, the white guys are coming. But I want to assure you that this white guy's got to go because I have to babysit my 8-month-old granddaughter. But I'll say a few foolish things before I leave and introduce somebody more important than me. But first, roll it.
I realized I wasn't just starting a business, I was like joining a revolution.
I grew up in the DARE generation of just say no, marijuana is a gateway drug.
We're a movement, an industry, and consumers that are all working together.
We got the power! I'm doing this film and I've never consumed cannabis.
The plant is the core of the whole industry.
Cannabis is now medicine. Cannabis is medicine.
We want everyday doctors to be able to look at cannabis as just part of your toolbox.
How are we going to figure out why this plant works so well if you don't even know what you're taking? How do we build standards for sustainability?
We're doing the earth a favor. You know, we can't have a rule on science. Elected officials have to make decisions based on data.
Marijuana is not a gateway drug, but marijuana offenses are a gateway into the criminal justice system.
They said, where's all the other Mexicans? I said, in prison.
We really wanted to make this about social justice.
It is the door that you take your foot and you bust it down.
This is starting to feel like a huge government conspiracy.
It's shedding light on a lot of dark things in our culture that we all want to change, and this is the catalyst for it.
This is the first time you're really going to be able to get in and have a voice.
We have the opportunity to create the first billion-dollar sector that is not dominated by men.
So there is no glass ceiling. We're building it together.
I believe walking the walk is the most powerful thing I can do.
I feel like I have more questions now than when I started.
I realized
I'm Marty Perlmutter, and that's all you need to know. It's not important, but what's important is that, in fact, the glass ceiling has been shattered thoroughly, that a wild number of women run cannabis businesses, and more are coming. The country is about to be saved 20 days from now by women. By women. And the qualities of a woman, I speak with a broken chromosome. I apologize for my Y chromosome, but I've noticed this since I was raised and privileged from earliest days with close proximity with powerful women, that women bring a power, an understanding not only of listening to one another and communicating harmoniously, but a dedication to healing and to wholeness and to spirituality. They bring empathy and warmth to leadership, and they transcend everything I know from almost 50 years in business that men are capable of doing. And so it is such an honor to welcome Wendy Borman, who's done a film about women's ascent, and to bow to you, our saviors.
Well, that was about the sweetest introduction I've ever had, so thank you so much. So I'm Wendy Borman, I'm the director of the documentary, and yes, I've cut my hair since we did that trailer, so it's still me. And before I introduce all of these fabulous pufferjets who are going to join me, I just want to get to know the audience a little bit. So who has been here all day for Digital Hollywood and had no idea that we were talking about cannabis? Anybody? Did anyone just wander in? Okay, you're still in a safe place if you wandered in. So anybody in the cannabis industry? Thank you for your work. All right, anybody thinking about getting into the cannabis industry? Excellent, there is room for you here. Okay, whatever you did outside of cannabis, you can still do that in cannabis. So thank you for having the courage to join the rest of us as we try to change the world. Is there anybody here who's actually never tried cannabis before? Or maybe you've never gone into a dispensary? Okay, that was me before I started this film project. And the reason I came to cannabis as a filmmaker, because this is my third documentary, was I saw it was the intersection of a couple of fabulous core values that I had in all my other work. And that's how we're going to structure the event tonight. So not only was cannabis a way to talk about gender parity, because at the time, 36% of senior leadership in the cannabis industry was women. That was back in 2015. The national average is 22%. So there was something about cannabis that was attracting more women. And we're going to ask the panelists in the roundtable about that when we get to the business section. But that was the starting point for me. And I very quickly realized that cannabis was also a way to talk about social justice and environmental sustainability. And at that point, it is the intersection of all of these really big ideas that we're trying to solve as a country. And we have one plant that could help us do that if we do it right. So that's how we're going to structure things tonight. We will show a video clip from the film, and then we'll talk to a group of panelists, and then we'll show another clip and talk to another round of panelists. But tonight, hopefully you will walk away with a bigger understanding, no matter where you start on the spectrum of cannabis learning. Hopefully you will understand a bit more about the science and the medicine, the social justice reasons for legalization, and then finally, how can we put all those pieces together into a responsible cannabis industry? So with that, let's roll the next clip and we'll get our panelists up here.
So if cannabis can treat debilitating illnesses like cancer and epilepsy, what else can it treat? Well, it turns out that's hard to answer because the US government prohibits studying the medical benefits of marijuana, which means doctors don't know how to treat patients using cannabis. But there's a few researchers who are hoping to change that.
Initially, I was a process engineer, and I asked myself, is there a way that we can accurately and consistently dose cannabis over time across patients? We have about a 300 data point system that we're collecting on patients. The trends that we've collected have been promising enough over time that we are elevating this to look and feel more like a medicine that's dosable, and that is a huge win.
I'm an MD. I practice internal medicine and psychiatry. I've been working with military veterans for about 20 years now. I'm hoping through our research that we'll be able to figure out ways to curb this epidemic of veteran suicide. Listening to a wife or a child talk about how they got their dad back or they got their husband back and how transformative this plant had been in these patients' lives, it was undeniable after a while. You just couldn't ignore the immense amount of anecdotal evidence.
The reality is we all have an endocannabinoid system, and we're all going to get sick. Most of us can use cannabis in one form or another as part of our medical regimen. We want everyday doctors to be able to look at cannabis as an option along with all their other treatment modalities, and cannabis is just part of your toolbox.
There's no question we have an epidemic of opioid overdose in this country. We wonder why we have such a high suicide rate in the veterans communities, because we're in the medical profession, we're the ones responsible for pummeling these veterans with so many pills. It's almost like our government is trying to deliberately subdue the veterans with piles of pills.
Now, I've been using cannabis now for about 5.5 years, and the amount I use is still quite low relative to what you hear about some or cancer patients and things like that, but I need it every single day. So I understand when somebody says to me, I want to use cannabis, but I don't want to feel high. I had been on 26 pharmaceuticals that had reduced me pretty much to a zombie most of the time. And because of cannabis, I'm now on 3 pharmaceuticals, none of which are opioids.
I don't view myself as pro-cannabis at all. I'm just pro-research, and I really believe that we need good science. If I wanted to study the harms of marijuana, I would have all the government dollars that I needed. But if you dare say you want to study efficacy of marijuana, those are the studies that are sort of systematically impeded by the government. You know, we can't have a war on science. Elected officials have to make decisions based on data.
Thank you. So that's just one clip of the whole science and medicine section of the film, but we got to know Dr. Sue Sicily pretty well, so down at the end. So instead of reading bios, 30 seconds. Anything else you want to add, Sue? And we'll just come down the line to get to know everybody.
I'll just say, so I'm the head of Scottsdale Research Institute, where we do controlled trials looking at flower. So we're evaluating smoked and vaporized flower as a medicine. And I just wanted to spend some time, hopefully later, highlighting barriers to research and talking about how, we need more female scientists in this space. It's unfortunate that the science is still dominated by men, and I really want to try to create a path and mentor young scientists who care about this work. So if any of you out there want to be in this field, please come and grab me after.
Brandy?
Hi, I'm Brandy Cross. I'm a native Angelino. What do I do?
Just 30 seconds intro. Who are you?
I was born with cerebral palsy and found out later autism. I was one of the first kids to get a medical marijuana recommendation here in LA. So I got my PhD in biochemistry eventually, and I study THCA and CBDA with the thesis statement that cannabis is a vegetable. And I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me here, and Sue Sicily obviously gave me the brevity to say that out loud. So this is awesome to be here.
Hello everyone, my name is Shweta Kaul. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer and one of the partners of Cannabis Labs. It's a cannabis testing lab. We're based in Santa Ana. My background is in analytical chemistry. I only recently, feel sometimes a little left out because I don't have a deep cannabis story. I only joined the industry about 2 years ago, but I'm always struck by how passionate and ever-changing, ever-adaptable everyone in the industry is. I did work for Big Pharma, but then I saw the light. So I used to work at Allergan in Botox research, but I do something way more fun now, working with regulators, working with people on social equity programs, working with the California Cannabis Industry Association, and I'm excited to see where the science would go, and it's particularly exciting to be here with so many other women scientists. I never look at scientists as men or women, and maybe that's my own naivete, but I think it's also that without even realizing, my lab is majority female, and it's just because I'm looking for the best people for the job. Like, once you take that barrier away and you have women in positions of power and women of color in positions of power, automatically it breeds diversity just by itself. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
And I'm Nurse Heather, and yes, I'm a registered nurse. I'm currently working to really educate nurses and healthcare professionals, and so we've developed the Cannabis Nurses Network to really pull together the nurses and organize what we're doing, because there's a lot of nurses out there that have tapped into this space. And they just needed some direction on how to really get into doing it in a way that can be very helpful so that they're educated. We really need the medical community on board with what we're trying to do with the medical side of this. And there's a lot of stigma, even within the medical community, against our patients. And so what we're trying to do through our Cannabis Nurses Network and the work that I'm currently doing is to educate and bridge that gap, because it's a huge gap. And once we bridge it, it's going to make huge changes.
Excellent. So, first question that I have for the panelists. and maybe we start with you, Brandy, but is access to cannabis a human right issue?
Oh, well, that's fun, because yes. So I work on the acids, if anyone is just getting into this. So cannabis doesn't just pop up with THC in it. I know that's mind-blowing, but actually most plants don't have a huge amount of THC in them when they're growing in the ground, and even when you dry them. So CBD high strains would then have CBDA, and then once you actually heat it, it converts. So it is a human right, and that's why I see it as a vegetable, because we all know that some things you eat raw and some things you eat cooked and some things you eat both ways. If you look at it that way, a lot of people are actually into microdosing now, and that's showing that if you went around like eating pot leaves with just a little bit of THC or THCA in them, like you can really get over a lot of different health problems. I mean, a lot without being high. So to me, it's a human right in that aspect medically, but also talking about people of color, we have lots of Native people who were enslaved in the Americas to grow hemp. We have people from Africa who never asked to be here, who have been brought here and who use daga or cannabis in their home continent for food and medicine. So with all those things said, it's the only thesis is that it's pretty racist to not allow a specific vegetable because someone might feel good.
Anyone else?
I'd like to just add that I think it's also an ethnobiological right, because we do have an endocannabinoid system. It's the largest receptor signaling system in our human body and is now known as the 12th human body system. We didn't know about it until the 90s, and now we know. So again, talking about education, we really need to be discussing the endocannabinoid system in nursing schools, medical schools, so that we can have a deeper understanding of this system on which this plant cannabis and lots of other things actually act to help keep balance in our bodies so that we can be of optimum health.
Yeah, I'd like to also add that it is a right to choose, but it's also a right to have an informed choice. And so having, resources, having more research, having the ability to study it more in depth is going to be key in achieving the goal of having it be available to everyone. Another part of this is, with the education and with people being more aware of it, I think we should also pay attention to the current regulatory system and the currently what's happening in the state, because we've been trying to push for compassionate care for a long time, and we keep getting pushback, and it wasn't included in the new set of regulations. And so people being more aware of those kind of things and asking people about it, asking your senators about it, like, hey, how come this isn't part of it? You want it to be open and available, but you're also making it very expensive, but you're also not making it available through Compassionate Care Act. So just being more informed about what's happening at that level with the politics in conjunction with the science is going to be key to achieving a lot more than what we've been able to.
I'll say too, I think I agree with everyone that having access to a natural plant should be a very basic civil right, and I think we should have access to all plant-based medicine, not just cannabis, and that's part of why we fight so hard to do research on flower, because we believe that flower is the most controversial. If you see, Karen will talk about later how hard it is going state by state trying to legalize this plant for medical purpose or otherwise, but how hard it is to persuade these legislatures to allow natural flower as part of these bills has been a real battle every time. And there's some reason they're afraid of the green leafy substance. They're okay if you convert it into oils and pills, and but that's, I think, just a basic problem we have, that we keep vilifying the flower as if it's part of recreational system, and then act like only oils are medicine, and that's why we're trying so hard to put flower through the entire FDA drug development process. And the study we're doing right now is an FDA phase 2 trial. So it's an early phase trial, but if that data looks compelling, then the FDA would allow us to go to phase 3. So we're not really that far away from getting flower through the process, but I just bring that up because I feel like flower has just been condemned for too long, and I think it sets the most precedence when it comes to botanical medicine. Getting flower through the FDA process is really essential, and I hope we can keep pushing for that.
And from the nurses, we thank you for that, Sue, because you and I have had this conversation before, that when someone is in crisis, if they have post-traumatic stress disorder and they're in a suicidal type crisis, there is nothing that can pull them out of it faster than lighting up a joint and having them take a few puffs. It will pull them out of a suicidal episode instantly with just a few puffs. And so as nurses, we tell our patients to have what we call, excuse my language, the fuck it kit, where when you get to that point that you go to your kit, you've got 2 joints and a picture of someone you love, and it's going to keep you from taking your life. So thank you for that, Sue.
That's important. Yeah, I think it speaks a lot to that the FDA can approve a pill that has CBD in it, with only CBD, with everything else stripped away from it, and that's fine. But having a plant pass through approval, I mean, it's encouraging that we can see that research and it's out there. So thank you for doing that. But I would like to see how that stands up against the isolated material just by itself.
Yes, I'm eager to see that too. And hopefully, the FDA will allow that, because right now we don't even have a study drug for phase 3 trials. Many of you are aware that, this monopoly where we have to buy our flower from the University of Mississippi, it's a very low quality plant material. And by the way, it's not allowed to be used in FDA phase 3 trials. So we don't even have a federally legal drug supply for phase 3. So this is one of the myriad ways that the government has systematically blocked this work. Is another strategy. By not providing flower for phase 3, suddenly we can't even proceed until the DEA licenses other growers for research. So if I have one call to action for you today, it's keep the pressure on the DEA to force them to license other growers so that we can finally have, a renaissance of cannabis research in this country where we can access unique phenotypes. It's actually not even unique, just diverse phenotypes, diverse chemovars that aren't currently available with the limited genetics in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Nothing bad about Mississippi, but it's Mississippi. Sorry, folks at home. So Sue, let's start with you for this next question then. The clip kind of teed this up specifically. When we're looking at the opioid epidemic in this country, how can cannabis help crack through that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have stated earlier today that cannabis shouldn't be viewed as a gateway drug, but as an exit drug, as an exit ramp off more addictive medication. And thankfully, we're actually seeing data published now that's verifying that. So this isn't just urban legend. We're really seeing data published in peer-reviewed medical journals. We had a study that I did with University of Michigan. It was just a simple survey of one dispensary in Michigan. It was like so basic, and we got published in the Journal of Pain, which astonished me, because it's, surveys are considered just such low credibility, low quality data, but it just shows you how hungry the medical community is to understand this, and we're all desperate to find solutions for the opioid crisis. So what we're seeing is data published both in Canada and in the US now, and we have a study that we're about to publish again, a much deeper dive looking at a national perspective that will show you again that this trend is real, and people, when they have safe legal access to lab tested cannabis, they are selecting that in favor of, over as a safer alternative to the more addictive, not just opioids, it's substituting for all kinds of other addictive prescriptions. We're seeing people substituting their benzodiazepine, their Xanax, their Klonopins and things like that. that. So really exciting trend. And the sad thing, I'll turn it over, but I want to just say that if you look at every opioid task force in every state, you'll notice that not a single state, I mean, Karen might correct me on this, but I have not seen a single state make a recommendation on how to tackle the opioid crisis. Not one of them has said we should employ medical cannabis for substitution therapy. And even in these opioid task forces where they're in legal states, that have really robust medical markets, they refuse to acknowledge that possibility.
Sue, I had just heard that in Nevada that they're looking to take, how there's a list that if you're prescribed opioids that you go on the list, right? There was something that's making its way through legislature in Nevada that says that if you are prescribed and you're on the opioid list, that you automatically qualify for medical cannabis. Had you heard anything about that?
No,
I just heard it recently. So it's things like that are pretty innovative, that if they're done, we can make a big dent in this issue.
I'd also like to add, again, I hate to turn a science panel very political, but I think it's important and it's key. But the opioid epidemic is actually helping change the mind of a lot of red states and traditionally states that have been very opposed to any kind of cannabis ordinance. So we're starting to see interest from places like Alabama, and they're doing research on how cannabis is going to impact the opioid epidemic. So it's really key that we're actually using this right avenue, and we're changing the hearts and minds of a lot of local people who have been very much against it, very much in the reefer madness kind of mentality. And I think it's a great step forward for sure.
I can't help but think, though, that there's still racism involved in this, because now that white people are addicted, we're looking at other avenues, right? When there were other people of color, other communities from the lower income neighborhoods, we've seen it in the past, they didn't do anything, we just incarcerated them. But now that it's opioids and anybody can get it from their doctor, we're looking at it. Randy, do you want to jump in?
Well, the problem is crack cocaine has a different chemistry, and the CIA knows more about it than any of us do, even in science, because cutting cocaine that way made it about, 100 times or 20 times more addictive, and that's their own CIA hoodoo. But you can look at cocaine users, and even cocaine users, which is kind of the opposite of opiate users. Again, that's a plant-derived thing that's just like this Epoladex drug. It once was a plant, but they isolated it away, and now it's cocaine. The same with opiates. They come from poppies, and these poppies grow in a place called Afghanistan that we had a war in. I won't go on that because science is political. But again, you strip all the things away, and then you have an addictive substance. What I have seen is that people who have burnt themselves out on crack cocaine and have PTSD from being on the streets and experiencing violence are thriving on cannabis now. A lot of them, though, are more prone to be pulled over and incarcerated, even in LA, even in California. Even though it's legal, it's still not legal for some people. And I'm sitting here, I'm very light-skinned. I never get pulled over, honestly, and I have a big old afro puff, but I'm very light-skinned. I wear glasses a lot. I don't look like anyone who would be up to anything. What's scary, though, is in my black neighborhood, I've caught police pulling people over and saying they smell like cannabis while I'm smoking a joint on the stoop. And I'm like, are you for real? And I'm like laughing at them and filming them because, this is what they're using now to get in our cars and look through our stuff. And it's, we're still not really citizens, black folks and native folks. I'm both. So not being treated as citizens when it comes to legalization is like the next push. And I think a lot of people are hoping to get in the industry and make lots of money, and that'll fix racism somehow, but we're just not seeing that in any state. In Colorado, it actually got worse, especially for our youth of color.
Yeah. And we'll dive into the social justice reasons for legalization in the second panel, but this is one of the things that's so fascinating to me, that just the intersections between all of this. Even if we're just looking at the science and the medicine of the plant, it still touches all these other areas. Over there? Sure.
supporting it with any kind of cannabis-derived solutions? Or
You're talking about amphetamine addiction?
Yeah, and we're doing a webcast, so let me just repeat it into a microphone. So the question is about methamphetamines and how cannabis might be able to help curb some of that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the studies haven't been done yet, but there's a lot of interest in seeing if cannabis could substitute for all sorts of illicit drugs, including meth, and it'll be really exciting once we can conduct trials like that. The problem is finding funding. Right now, still, over 90% of the government funding is going towards safety studies, so we can only examine cannabis as a drug of abuse, not look at the effectiveness of cannabis, for instance, in serving as substitution for meth. Finally, there's some new money available at the federal level to look at cannabis for opioid substitution, but that's brand new and it's very limited. But maybe that's a good trend, and hopefully the public pressure will continue on NIH and NIDA to start funding efficacy trials finally.
And I would like to mention one thing.
Why is cannabis a Schedule 1 and methamphetamine is a Schedule 2?
Racism.
Nixon?
That's a way deeper question than
There's a bit, for the folks at home and folks who didn't hear, why is methamphetamine a Schedule 2 and cannabis is a Schedule 1? And, I mean,
I can
quickly.
very quickly, there was some medical benefits from methamphetamines. They were used in the medical community briefly, and at that point of time, because of that slight medical benefit, it got descheduled a little bit. And with cannabis, we're not acknowledging, even though they're FDA drugs now approved, we're still not acknowledging it. But I would like to make something clear. I don't think we should dwell too much on the scheduling, because the minute it gets scheduled is when big pharma and big tobacco jump in. So maybe we shouldn't be too eager for that. We should be more eager for more research and more data. That's what we need right now. She had mentioned if you do a quick literature search, on PubMed or one of the journal sites, you will see for cannabis, it's all very negative data that comes up, right? It's like things about how it has negative cardiovascular effects and in very, very minute populations. But that's the kind of study, because that's what she said, that's what gets funded. What's exciting is we're actually seeing sort of this resurgence of international research. So I've seen really cool publications from Tunisia, from Israel, from Canada, from around the world, and they have looked at using cannabis in all kinds of addiction. My background is in addiction research, so I find this super fascinating, and it's helped with tobacco addiction, it's helped with opioid addiction, so I feel like even with methamphetamine addiction, it definitely has possibilities. So there is research out there, not from the US, and it's kind of sad because research R&D in the US has always been at the forefront of so many cool things in the medical community, and right now we're falling behind, and the rest of the world's doing all this cool research out there.
And I'll add, a lot of people who get on drugs are self-medicating, and if we just strip away the respectability lens for a minute, they're still humans dealing with issues. And I'm autistic, so I have done meth in my past. I've done a lot of different drugs. And it was just a self-medication because my parents wouldn't give me Adderall, they gave me coffee. And then when I tried meth, I was like, oh man, this is kind of cool, I can write forever. And the thing is, I was just self-medicating, then I found pot, and I was like, oh, this is much better, I'm not like grinding my teeth, and like, all the side effects. And my parents noticed I was more emotionally stable, and totally supported pot. They never knew I was doing, like, trying meth and stuff, come on now. I was like 14. But we're seeing a lot of kids get off Adderall with THCA. They're actually more focused, and it's very little. We're talking 2 to 5 milligrams a day. So over the process of a day, they're taking a few milligrams instead of their 50 or 100 milligram Adderall, and they're getting off of those drugs. It's a little dicey getting them off those drugs because they are so addicting. Any kind of amphetamine is going to be really addicting, but there is promise, and I think at UC Irvine they're also doing some research on high dose of THCA and addiction, so that's kind of interesting.
Also, and Adderall is Schedule 2, right?
Yeah.
So that's important. Methamphetamine is still Schedule 1. It's just the prescribable stimulants like Adderall and things like that, or Ritalin, that are Schedule 2. And the reason the scheduling is so bizarre is because it's being done by law enforcement professionals, right? You have the DEA deciding on what schedule each of these belongs in, and that's just, I think we all agree, that's totally inappropriate. It needs to be completely reorganized by people who understand the medical properties of these drugs.
Great. Okay, so last question for this group of fascinating people. Let's talk about some of the local issues. So California and Los Angeles specifically, what are some of the testing, the packaging, the dosing requirements that people should be aware of? And within that, if you want to tie in your work with medical cannabis and where we are with adult use, not necessarily from a legal perspective, but like what do patients or consumers need to know? So who wants to start?
Let's just start. I'll start. So I have the testing lab, so I'll go. There you go. It's been a challenge, to say the least. LA, for some reason, we had this whole vision that it was going to be this wonderful mecca of cannabis use and cannabis regulations, and for some reason we've seen a very low level of licensing appearing from it. We keep hearing promises and educational things, and that they're trying their best, but for some reason we're seeing a lot of licensing appear in Northern California, way more than we are in Southern California, and what that does is it continues the unregulated market to just thrive. And that's what's happening. The testing requirements are pretty significant, as are the packaging requirements. And unfortunately, they all remain in flux because we don't have final regulations out yet. The final regulations can drop any minute, still go through the whole comment period, so we're looking at final regulations by the end of it. And I can tell you as a scientist, when you change things, we can't change things in a week or two. You need months of research and validation in order to change things, and it's very hard to explain to people that you can't just change levels and change action levels and change requirements. Right now, from the testing point of view, there is no difference between medical use and adult use. In fact, when I first joined this industry, I was very surprised that the medical use of cannabis didn't have some of these testing requirements. Why weren't we testing for pesticides for the medical community? Seems like a no-brainer, and they sort of had the ordinance go through, and then the bill passed, and it just sort of stayed there, and it became this gray area that nothing got done in. So in a way, it's good we have these regulations, but they're becoming very expensive for sure. There's a lot of requirements for child-resistant packaging. Even the testing requirements coming from the pharmaceutical industry and looking at food industry, we are looking at regulations that are a little bit of overkill, maybe slightly, but also it's not allowing the industry to adapt, right? Like the idea is that regulations only get tighter and more stringent with time goes on. I would have liked to see a more science-based approach to regulations where they started off with, hey, we'll start at this level, try and get everyone under the fold, and then tighten it up as people learn and change. Because one thing this industry has always proven time to time is it's very adaptable, and it changes as required and as needed. And people survive. They do what's necessary, but I feel like that opportunity has been taken away a little bit.
Any other thoughts?
I'll just say, I think the good thing about the regulatory environment is that we are preventing the biggest public health problem we have could be edibles at this point. And so the way they've clamped down on making sure that the dosing is easy, clear for people to figure out, so they, having edible overdoses coming to the ER is the worst, and it really takes the industry back many steps, because we've got to, when they see data from our poison control centers on the rise, the opponents of cannabis really beat us over the head with that. So whatever we can do as a community to, as a cannabis community, to try to teach each other how to avoid those mishaps, and if bringing the sample size, 10 milligram little pieces, and trying to make sure that we do everything we can to urge our friends to prevent pediatric exposures so we don't get that data into the published literature. It's so important. And I'll just say, my final thing is just, Just to point out that the cannabis that I buy from University of Mississippi for our controlled trials, it has excessively high levels of mold that would have never passed state testing. So I think my last call again is keep the pressure on the DEA to end this monopoly so that I don't have to hand out moldy weed to the patients in our study. Yeah, thank you, guys.
All right, last question from the audience for this panel. Go for it, Life.
You did a lot of research with my fellow veterans, and some of you guys know I'm the executive director of Veterans Health and First Care. We teach veterans how to get the provision of cannabis or hemp. What did your research show on female veterans? Those who've gone to combat, now they are able to go to combat MOSs. Have you done some research on the female, and what does that statistic or that data show?
So for the webcast folks at home, the question is about research specifically on female veterans. So anything?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, this has been really challenging to recruit female vets into studies. I don't know why they're so isolative, but finally in the last year we made a really concerted effort, kind of guerrilla PR tactics, getting them in these trials, and we have a better balance now. But you'll see that most of the clinical trials on cannabis, very few females are participating. So we definitely need to fix that, and whatever we can do as a community to rally our females, whether it's female vets or just females in general, we need data because we need to be able to compare how female, the gender reactions to cannabis to different strains are definitely not, monoliths. So.
Great. Key is more research.
Yeah.
It's more research, more data, more studies.
We have to move on because I have two more panels and we started late, everyone. So I'm trying to be the timekeeper, but they are here. Speak to them quietly on the side, and we're going to show the next clip and get ready for our next round of panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Department of Justice, Drug Enforcement Administration, Food Drug Administration are all subcategories of the same thing. Okay, so this war on drugs is somehow justice. This is the new Jim Crow.
The greatest harm that's associated with marijuana is actually the prohibition of marijuana and the laws that have been created around it.
Black and Latino people are arrested at much higher rates, even though they use and sell marijuana at about equal rates as whites.
If you're looking objectively at the evidence, you will see that cannabis prohibition has failed.
The government take a bow. Who's the pusher now?
Okay, so some fairly rich things in that small little clip. Ophelia, you're up on this one too. Madera, come on up. I think we need to switch. We good? Yeah. So Chong is her last name.
That's okay.
She went from So as a housekeeping note, we added Ophelia to this panel because we had 5 on the other ones because Janvi dropped out. So that's where we are if you're keeping track according to this. So quickly, why don't we, Betty, we'll start with you because we saw you in that clip. 30 seconds. Who are you? What do you do?
Hi, I'm Betty Aldworth. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I entered the cannabis space about a decade ago in Colorado and became one of the leading voices around policy issues in the medical space, which brought me to becoming the spokesperson for Amendment 64 in Colorado. I was able to organize the field there and became introduced to Students for Sensible Drug Policy, where now I get to help set an agenda for 8,000 young people activated in 34 countries around the world, working on cannabis policy reform, but additionally the full breadth and scope of the war on drugs, including psychedelics for therapeutics, harm reduction responses to the overdose crisis, and of course intersecting issues such as racial justice, criminal justice, and economic justice.
Thank you. All right, Ophelia, why don't you jump in and then we'll continue moving this direction.
My name is Ophelia Chong. I deal in the power of images that has no language barrier. So my company is Stockpot Images, and I started it because I was ignorant. I still am occasionally, and so what I try to do through the power of images is to destigmatize cannabis users in the community.
All right, Fanny.
So I'm kind of going to read because I get a little nervous from public speaking, but nonetheless, I am a lifelong resident of Los Angeles. I am co-founder of Latinos for Cannabis. LFC was formed to improve the educational and informational resources on the medicinal benefits of cannabis in the underserved and underrepresented Latino community. In Los Angeles, we are 40%, and it is a shame that we are not properly represented in our community. So part of us is access. A big part is access to information, access to licensing, and this panel with legalization is very personal as a Mexican origin.
And I'm Karen O'Keefe. I direct the State Legislative Department at the Marijuana Policy Project. MPP is a nationwide nonprofit that works to change marijuana laws. We first worked on medical marijuana, which we still did, decriminalization and legalization, and we work with wonderful people in many states to do away with marijuana prohibition.
Thank you. Okay, so first, big question. The film suggests, and maybe the entire room agrees, that drug prohibition, the war on drugs, and specifically cannabis prohibition, was created to target people of color. So how does this history play out in your own experiences with the industry? So, Fanny, do you want to start?
Sure. And I will start because it specifically targeted Mexicans with Operation Wetback. A lot of people actually correlated to the 1930s with Reagan and Nixon era. However, this racist origin is actually dated back to almost a century to the advent of immigration. So the correlation with immigration is very, very close, and it really did stem from racism, particularly specifically with Mexicans.
And it even goes so far as how we used to spell the word, and the fact that we called it marijuana as opposed to any of these other names too, right?
Right. And there's actually, I'd like to encourage everybody to look up a recent article by a writer named Danielle and Leafly, and it talks about this much needed conversation that we need to have, because being in this space and speaking on this topic, it's a very uncomfortable topic for a lot of people to really have a serious conversation, but I have a deep conviction that we cannot forget about this conversation, as it was the origin, and the communities affected by the war on drugs should see some benefit, because it's only the decent human thing to do is to acknowledge the harms and the repair that is needed as the burgeoning industry promises such lucrative ends and means.
Yes. Karen, Betty, anyone else want to jump in on that?
Sure. So when we think about not only the racist origins of the war on drugs, but the ways that it is used today to marginalize and oppress populations, specifically people of color, people of low income, we need to consider that the criminal justice system and other economic systems are built around the idea that if you have a drug offense on your record, you ought not be able to fully access a home mortgage, a job, education, or the whole variety of other support system regular pieces of participating in our capitalist society that are available to folks without a drug conviction on their record. And that starts from the beginning, right? What do we do with kids who are caught with drugs in school? We expel them, suspend them, kick them out, separate them from their support networks, separate them from the possibility of education. We deny them funding to go to college, removing all opportunity for hope, for economic advancement, because you have to have a college degree to get those good jobs, And then imagine that this person who doesn't get to go to college, probably has a crappy job, and perhaps is continuing to use drugs in a fashion that exposes them to the extraordinary over-policing that happens in communities of color, specifically as a method to continue a silent, secret, barely dog-whistled Jim Crow policy. Those young people are going to end up trapped in the criminal justice system, and once they get there, they're not going to get the support that they need. Once they get out, they're also still not going to get the support they need, and they are going to be trapped in a cycle of incarceration, drug misuse, and other, lifestyle issues that are going to keep them trapped in this situation. And until we break the drug war, which is used as a primary tool of oppression by our government, and remove that opportunity for police, which that's a whole other panel, until we remove those opportunities for police and the carceral state to entrap people in a lifetime of missed opportunity, then we aren't going to be able to fix some of the fundamental and core problems that we see in terms of the ways that racial injustice is meted out in this country. Now, the drug war isn't the only thing, right? All of these questions are incredibly complicated, and we can have very long conversations about the overdose crisis and drug misuse in general and how all of these things impact communities. But the point stands that as long as we're giving the police the tool of drugs to arrest a person, we are giving them a tool that is unbelievably easy to enforce against and inappropriately addressed through the criminal justice system. We must end cannabis prohibition and the drug war in order to fix these problems in our country.
May I add to that? Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. Now I know who I am. As a Canadian Asian, now an American Asian, I took my citizenship in 2000 so I could vote. I'm not profiled, right? I've driven up and down the coast with a lot of cabbage in my car, and I can just wave like this and drive 85 miles an hour. I'm never stopped, right? Because, look, I look like the Korean PTA mom. So I was like, I don't know what that is in the back, right? So as an Asian American, I have not been affected as much as other minorities in cannabis. So, if you do see me waving, stop me, because I got some cabbage in my car that you might want. So the reason why I started Stockpot is I've been in photography for about 30 years, and my sister she's going to die, so she's been using it. And I looked at her and I thought, that's a stoner. So I walked over to my computer after I stopped crying, and I looked up how other stock agencies, because I've launched a couple of them, how do they see other people who use cannabis, right? And this is 2015, and I'm going to read you the keywords now. It's 2018 that they still use for African American men. Keywords is how you find an image, right? You type it in, you get cat with a ball and a kid, right? So you get those images. For the keywords that they use for African American men, some of the images, bad habit. Let's go to the top here. Bad habit, drug dealer, addict, addiction, African American ethnicity, bad habit, ghetto, forbidden, narcotic, and those are just unhealthy living is another one too. And of course, who he is, an adult, smoking, so on and so forth. But these are the words they're using to describe people of color at a major billion-dollar publicly traded image source. And that's what I wanted to change, and we don't do that. We only have positive images, because if we don't then people are going to continually use these images in the way to describe men and women of color with cannabis. Not the white people. They don't have those words. So I'm not going to name who it is, but it is there, and it's still 2018 where it's being used.
So in addition to just changing the idea of what somebody who uses cannabis looks like, how do we truly level the playing field so everyone has access to come into the cannabis industry? Because to Fanny's point, the only socially responsible thing we can do is to try to repair some of the damage that's been done by the war on drugs, is by allowing them to come into this billion with a B, billion-dollar industry. So how do we do that? What does that look like?
I don't know if any states figured out the perfect way to do it, but a lot more states are looking and very seriously trying to answer this question as best they can, and we can learn and see from them what can be improved on. One of the states that tried to make this a central piece of the legalization law was Massachusetts, and they had two different programs. They had a training program where people who are going into the industry who are from low-income communities that are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs would have training and technical assistance to try to get into the industry. And they also had a kind of fast-track application system for equity applicants. And on paper it sounded wonderful, and I was really hopeful that we would end up with a cannabis industry that was very, very diverse. Unfortunately, last I saw, there were only 3 equity applicants that had been filled out because it was a very onerous, intensive process. Also, municipalities were allowed to essentially give a veto power and to have a host agreement that required deep packets. So the training piece is lovely. Unfortunately, the equity piece, we might need to keep learning from that and see what else to do. A lot of cities here in California, like Oakland and LA, have equity programs of their own with incubator programs. I think Fanny knows a lot more about it than I do. So trying to have some kind of pieces like that is important. Another thing is just not having extraordinarily high barriers to entry. Of course, we've had, our entire history has been full of racism, slavery, segregation. We have unequal wealth, and having very high capital requirements, which are required in some states, make the industry all the more unequal. So having some kind of fair process to make sure that people without vast resources have opportunity is important too. Making sure that people who have criminal convictions are allowed in the industry. So a lot of the recent laws, maybe all of them, provide that a person can't be denied employment in the industry just because they have a conviction. Of course, there's a lot of expungement going on now in a lot of cities and counties. There's mandatory automatic expungement, so a person doesn't have to go petition. I heard in Pennsylvania from the head of the Black Caucus there that their medical program is 30% African American led, and they had some language there that made sure that they had a much more equitable result. Maryland had tried to have something similar. Unfortunately, the way it was written was not constitutional. According to the Attorney General, you have to do a diversity study first, so it's really important that they be well thought out so that they don't end up getting tied up in court. But there's a lot of things being done, but I don't know if there's any that's perfect, but there's a lot to learn from.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and it's a very complicated topic because there's many ways that we can definitely try to even out the playing field, but the truth of the reality is that for 100 years, our communities have been marginalized and disenfranchised. So that work is not going to happen overnight, and it's not just going to happen with a couple of us leading the way. It really is a community effort to acknowledge, first of all, psychologically speaking, that there was harm imposed in our to our communities. That's the first and foremost honest conversation that we have to have, not just with ourselves, but amongst our friends in the industry and outside the industry, because as we know, the political climate right now is, I don't even have words for it, and it is, like I said, it's a community effort to really have that conversation, be honest with ourselves, and in the times that we're living, it's no longer okay to be against racism. You have to be vocally against racism. Again, we bring it back to human decency. And I think that's where it starts. Now, getting a little bit more technical, I think with legislation, there's been some good stuff coming out from it. Senator Bradford just approved a bill, or helped pass a bill, drafted a bill, and it's Bill SB 1294, and it's actually a $10 million social equity fund for the state of California to be used for business loans, capital improvements, regulatory compliance, license fee waivers, technical and administrative assistance through local equity programs and participants. As she mentioned, only 4 cities in the state of California have actually drafted up a social equity program. How many cities do we have in California? Now that is clearly indicative about the conversations that are not happening and that we need to continue to push as a people. Also, what we've been doing with our organizations is also pushing for the funds, because theoretically speaking, these social equity programs are great. But implementing them, we need resources. And without resources, nothing's going to change. We can have the best intentions, we can outwork ourselves, but nothing's going to change. Felicia, hi Felicia, actually has postcards where we're starting a campaign to really pressure Mayor Garcetti to set up a specific fund for the social equity program. One of the solutions that was earlier introduced was the Cannabis Reinvestment Fund of 1% to operators. Now, what that does when we don't have specific funds for these programs, it really puts us at odds with our white counterparts that see us as a burden to their flourishing of their industry, and forget that most of the consumers, we make them up. So the way that I try to offset certain conversations is really reminding folks that they are the consumers, they are the market, and that is our leverage that we need to push to support brands, organizations that are actually giving back to our communities. And I challenge you today to go to your favorite brand and ask them, what is their community plan looking like? What is their community benefits planning looking like? Are they active in the community? And if not, I strongly suggest that you move to another one, because there are plenty of great quality medicine, but not enough social responsibility corporations. So with that being said, I urge you to really leverage your spending purchase power, and that's what I do with our Latino community. A lot of people don't give us the credit that we actually put into this market. I mean, the world revolves around with the help of Latinos. We're not just workers. We're actually very business savvy. We may not be on paper, and that's the challenge that we have encountering right now, is the lack of access, lack of pathways to actually know how. And with the previous panel, the mentioning of there's not enough licenses out there as projected to be, it's because of the high barriers. It's because people cannot afford the compliance, all these permits, the ridiculous amounts of premium prices that we're paying in our industry for things that other businesses don't pay not even a fraction of. And so with that, there's also discrimination in our own industry. We can't even do taxes properly as a business. So I urge you as well to keep engaging in the legislation, in your local legislation, to really bring those barriers down, because one thing we know for sure in California, the unregulated market will always live on. I'm not saying that's where we should be, but when you have communities being put against a hard place in a rock, they're gonna always choose survival. And that's really where we're trapped, double trapped, triple trapped in our communities, facing all these high barriers and obstacles with no source of funding but just talk.
Anything you want to add, Betty or Ophelia?
So in 2013, when we were working on the working group in Colorado to implement Amendment 64, I watched a cannabis entrepreneur trade away some sort of business benefit, regulatory capture, something or another, for the right of people with criminal convictions to work in the cannabis industry. I watched that go down. And there aren't many people who never get to talk to me again, but that person sure is one of them. I think that we are fooling ourselves if we believe that folks who are participating in capitalist systems who are not here for justice primarily, and then entrepreneurialism second, are going to defend ideas like reparation. If we're here for justice, then what we need to do is consider that the drug war is a comprehensive set of systems that weaves its tentacles into every aspect of social economic life, governmental life, and we need to take the same sort of comprehensive approaches to how we handle reparations for it. And I'm going to use that word over and over again, because that's what it comes down to. We must make reparations on the war on drugs, and I don't care how uncomfortable you are with that. That is the work that we must do. So I encourage you, if you are considering moving into this industry, if you are considering becoming a part of this movement, to consider that it has been, that like all of this stuff that has happened on the backs of black and brown people because of the way that policing is done, and in a very specific and explicit effort to maintain systems of oppression that are no longer legal. Well, Voting Rights Act was pulled back, but up until a few years ago, were no longer legal by most mechanisms. So I do hope that you'll think about that. I hope that you'll think, if you are particularly an entrepreneur of privilege, about how it is you are going to make a case for your business to participate in a reparative process, in a restorative process, where you are going to be making those commitments. And I'll tell you what, it's not just about doing what's right. It's not. There's a business case to be made here too. 91% of millennials want to know that your business is doing something right, and if they are going to frequent you and build loyalty, then it's going to be because you have that great social responsibility plan in place, and you're addressing these issues. So I could go through the dozens of statistics that support this. There's a good business case for it too, even if you aren't with me that we have to do reparations as a moral imperative.
Okay, last question. So one of the intersections that I want to make sure we talk about is the environment. So because if none of us can breathe, if none of us can drink the water, if none of us can grow our plants, we're not any better off than where we were before. So prior to legalization, in California, we were hearing that some of the illicit growers were growing in the state parks, they were using harmful pesticides, diverting waterways, those sorts of things. So I'm curious, where are we now? Do we know? Is any of that getting better? And then again, what as consumers can we do to help make sure that the environmental social justice piece is not left behind?
So I'm not sure the specific numbers, but I do know I saw that the DEA and the California Enforcement Division targeted a bunch of grows that were in the parks this past summer, so it's certainly still happening. Right now, of course, we have 9 states where marijuana is legal, and then we have 41 where it's not. So there's still a lot of demand for illegal marijuana, and it's still grown illegally in Oregon, in Colorado, in California, as it has been for decades and decades. And that's going to keep happening until it's legal everywhere. And then, as Fanny mentioned, you still have a lot of people that are having trouble transitioning to the legal market because of barriers to entry. You still have actual storefronts here in LA that are not legal and not licensed, that are, I don't know where the products come from. So it will take some time probably in every state to have a transition from the illegal market to legal regulated market. The more that can be done to bring in those gray market operators or illegal operators, the better. And of course, just supporting legalization in the other 41 states will be key.
I agree. I think that this is a very important topic that ties in with how well do we work with legislators, or vice versa. How well do they work with us? And really understanding the playing field of enforcement, because, and I'll quote one of our favorite farmers, enforcement without opportunity is a broken paradigm. And if we don't offer, if we don't have a viable opportunity to transition over, the cycle is going to be ever perpetuating. And people, the risk is much higher, but the people running it are still going to come in and going to cycle into the prison system. And, you know, again, all of that is just recriminalization that is happening right now. If we really don't come to a happy medium in lowering these barriers, what we see a lot right now is money grab from all places, and including the whole social equity aspect. We've seen a lot of marketing ploys using this, and that's why I myself, including other leaders, you know, we get together to really, how can we work with these government officials, because we have to make them our friends, right? And there are certain soft areas where we feel that we can actually have the much needed conversations, and one of them is public safety and the environmental aspect as well. So having that community conversation of how it's going to affect our environment is key to knowing how to set up the laws, and in that transition period, as said in the previous panel, it should start off a lot more broader and narrow in instead of the other way, because otherwise it's just going to constrict the life of what the legal the legal market would be.
Ophelia, you had some really interesting things to say about this.
But what we've gone from is a flower to a really pretty gold pen. And we've gone from growing to a warehouse now that's 8 football fields big in Cathedral City. It's owned by Canadians, right? So where we've gone is pretty things in pretty boxes that are all disposable, not recyclable. And it's not just about getting people into the business, it's what the business is becoming. And it is pretty boxes, pretty batteries, and it's now not a flower anymore. And if we can, this is veering a little bit away from the conversation, but it's important to look at too where the industry is going, and is moving so quickly and so far away from what originally it was, that is unrecognizable. And by Q1 next year, that shelf space, even if you don't have a part of the market, it's getting even more minuscule to get anything on the shelf. Even if you get a license, if you can manufacture, how are you going to, then you're going to need the next step to get that thing on that shelf, right? Because everyone's going to have 100 SKUs, 50 SKUs. You're going to compete with that with a lot of money. So even though, like Fanny says, we can get people licensed and move forward, we then have to get them on the shelf to make that money back. But we have to do it in a way that honors what the plant is. I don't want to buy a gold pretty pen that now throws in the trash, right? I don't want that. I want something that is valuable and that preserves our environment, again, the environment.
Thank you.
And if I may add, I think it also circles back to us as individuals, and what role are you going to play in this market and how it's going to develop. Is the environment important to you? Is social justice important to you? Is business development important to you? Is community engagement important to you? And all these intersections that Wendy talked about, they appear very, very much so. So as newcomers, I invite you to really research your brands that you find perhaps good product, perhaps good branding, good marketing, and take it a step further and vet them out. One of the most important things in this industry, which often can become a fake environment, is really vetting out things. Information changes on a daily, regulations and all the specs change, but the DNA of that entity and of that brand, company, whatever you want, call it, remains. And if you can really identify yourself with that DNA, speaking from the Latino community, that's really where it's at for us as consumers, is how well the brand treats us, how well the brand treats our family. And becoming a household brand goes far beyond just a pretty packaging, far beyond just, good marketing. It really comes to how well you connect to people's lives, how much they resonate with the identity of the brand.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm sorry we didn't have time for questions from the audience for this section. We'll try to do it at the next panel. So thank you so much. Thank you. You've set the bar really high for our next panel. It's about business. So.
I just became, at 60-some years old, a centerfold in Newsweek magazine.
The legal cannabis industry also provides communities who've been most affected by the drug war an opportunity to participate.
Why should the African American community care about legalization?
What other resources can you offer the diverse population?
You should care because it's going to bridge a gap between cannabis, commerce, and the community.
I would say as a woman of color, we've just kind of been left out of the conversation. You're not going to be paid the same as the man, but you still have to work just as hard, and don't cry at work, and don't be a bitch, and be a good mom. How can you as a woman, be a business leader and be an entrepreneur, and how do you get in on what is essentially, the genesis of this industry in our country? This is the first time you're really going to be able to get in and have a voice and do something, right, where you haven't been able to before.
While the cannabis industry seems welcoming to all women, that doesn't always mean everything is rosy in the green rush. Because marijuana is still considered illegal at the federal level, many financial institutions are very reluctant to provide any kind of services to businesses in the cannabis industry.
Most cannabis entrepreneurs can't go in and open a bank account.
You don't go in there and say, I have a pot bakery. You go in there and just say, I have a bakery.
It's actually a huge hassle to deal in cash. We want to be able to bank.
They are, in some ways, sitting ducks for potential burglaries or other violent crime.
It's becoming more and more dangerous, and that's only going to get worse.
It's getting really old living like a criminal when we're not actually criminals.
My last letter was really funny. They said they needed to end their relationship with me. It's not you, it's us.
All right. So, as you can see, we've kind of scaffolded this discussion where we started with some of the cannabis plant basics, and then we talked about the social justice reasons for legalization and some of the issues that they face. But that doesn't go away when we open businesses in this space. So let's start with Janine down at the end. 30 seconds. Who are you? What do you do?
I'm Janine Moss. I am CEO of Anabi, and Anabi is the first women-focused accessories for carrying cannabis discreetly. We've got odor-proof compartments and things like that. I am a branding and marketing person, but even more than that, I'm a new product developer, and I love culture change. So I've had my eye on and been part of this industry for a million years, well, before it was an industry. And I was really incensed that that women weren't recognized as a market. I mean, here in the United States, if you don't control some purse strings, you don't have a voice. You know, you don't exist in a capitalist society. So it's not my first time seeing that, but that's why what really motivated me to get in there and create products for women when we weren't recognized.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Vilches, and I'm the CEO of Premium Produce. I was the first youngest Latina to win the Nevada very difficult licenses, cultivation and production. I was 27 at the time. Very recently, I also applied in California because the law started to change for the better, and was the only female to apply and win 4 licenses. Thank you.
Yes.
And more recently, I'm awaiting results because I applied for the first ever weed lounge license in West Hollywood. So I'll find out any day now. Thank you guys.
Hi guys, I'm Tiffany Chin. I am the co-founder and president of Leaf Spice Snoop, one of the most recognizable cannabis celebrity brands in the world. We are available in Canada. We have been for about 2 years now medically, and today recreationally. And then we are available in Colorado as well in over 160 retail stores. The question I get most often is, when you come into California, we're taking so long because we're trying to get you guys the best weed ever. So that's why it's taking so long, but it's coming soon. My background is in consulting. I was doing consulting in actuarial sciences prior to being in the cannabis space, or I guess entertainment space. When I moved out to LA, I was actually working for a management firm for hip hop artists, and I just so happened to fall into such an amazing industry with, I guess, you know, Snoop Dogg's been a champion of this plant for over 2.5 decades. He's never been shy about his use, and he's never backed down from any criticism. So if there's a model for kind of pushing through the space and making sure that you're heard, it's him. So, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Felicia Carbajal. I'm a longtime community organizer in both the LGBT movement as well as the cannabis movement. I'm also the community engagement director of Smart Farm Research Group. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that I'm lucky enough and fortunate to work with Dr. Brandy Cross on some innovative things, and the other thing it means is I have a lot of liberty right now to challenge the industry surrounding values. So everybody knows my core values are respect, honor, and include. So as an organizer, we utilize all of those tools to help other marginalized people in the city of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Okay, so the bar has been set pretty high for cannabis businesses. So my first question is, why are diversity and inclusion important to who is leading the cannabis industry? And to answer that question, I would love it if each of you could give your company a grade. Like if you need A plus being the highest all the way down to like an F minus, what would be your company's grade for diversity and inclusion? Felicia, do you want to?
Well, thank you for giving me that grade. I think we're probably at a B plus, mainly because we don't have any cis males or anybody who's male working with us. Well, give us a B plus for that.
Okay.
I'm going to also say a very similar grade, a B plus. So the 3 co-founders are all minorities in their own right. Snoop Dogg, obviously. The other co-founder is a Korean American, and I am a double minority, being Chinese American and a woman. We employ, our design team was all women. Snoop actually specifically chose a design team that was all women because he wanted the aesthetic to cater to what is half of the consumer population of this plant, right? This plant is a woman. It's a female plant. And he recognized that in order to really penetrate, who makes the purchasing decisions, right? Who goes to Target? Who's the one that buys the things for the household? It's the woman. And I'm not trying to say that in a sexist way, but when I'm bringing home the weed, right, you got to cater to me, not my husband or my teenage kid or whatever that is. It's me. So he knew that, and he was like, let's make sure that we hire, gay people, straight people, black people, white people, like every type of thing under the sun, rainbows, everything. We've got it all under our building.
I love that. I would give myself an A, and I'll tell you why. I am Hispanic. My COO, he's also Mexican, born and raised there. Our grower is Hawaiian. We've got, our vision as a company is to allow and give everyone an opportunity, which is exactly why I was so excited to speak on this panel. I think diversity and inclusion is everything. At Premium Produce, we want to definitely be able to deliver that, and we're looking to incorporate programs where we give everyone an opportunity and we allow them to get there. Our COO is the first, I would say, man to come on board because it was so dominated by women. Our doctor is Korean. So we have a lot of diversity in Premium Produce, and we plan on expanding greatly just like that.
Okay, Janine?
Well, I'm going to give us a B because we do have one man. But we do have, we're a very small team, but we do have a couple people of color, and I can tell you that I did not try to diversify Anabi. I didn't even think about it. My team is people that I've worked with over the years, and I've been in New York for a long time, and it's fairly diverse there. And so, I picked great people who wanted to be part of it, and that worked out great.
Great. So I started off the introduction talking about how initially 36% of senior leadership in the cannabis industry was women. And that study, it's a self-reported study, but that came out in 2015. Last summer, 2017, it had already dropped down to 27%. So in 18 months, we'd lost 9 percentage points. So I've got a couple ways we can tackle this, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. First of all, what changed in those 18 months? And then what are some of the barriers or obstacles that female founders or female leaders may be running up against?
Would you like me to? Okay, so I think that it declined in 18 months dramatically because cannabis became the new thing. Everyone started reading articles. We have all these big companies. I just read that Wrigley got into the cannabis industry, very aggressively. Coca-Cola's entertaining it. So this is exactly why it dropped. We've got all these big companies that are coming from existing infrastructures, and they're just looking to overshadow now the cannabis industry. So it's imperative that we as women, as men, as minorities, respond accordingly and set policies, procedures, so that we don't allow this cannabis billion-dollar industry to be so convoluted with the same things that they've already had. So that's my reason.
I think that in the last 18 months, a lot of eyes have been on Canada, the global nation leader of research and legalization, and just making sure that this plan is getting to the hands of who need it. I think additionally, actually it's not I think, this is pretty proven, but in the last 18 months there have been a lot of acquisitions, a lot of companies buying other smaller companies, like just to name a few, like Cannabis has bought a lot. I know that, what's the other one? Afria, I think, has done a little bit as well. The other, Aurora, MedMen's done some as well. Yeah, MedMen just made a huge one up there. So what's happening is that these companies that are cash rich and able to make these types of acquisitions are led by men. And they're acquiring these other companies, which may or may not be led by women, but if they are, I don't know, maybe there's something about women that are like, okay, cool, take it. You want to give me $20 million? I'm fine with that. And maybe most people are fine with that, but like Priscilla just said, we need to kind of stay in the game. We need to continue doing procedures and policies that not just lift us up, but keep us there. Yeah.
And I'd like to just add, too, that it starts at the very beginning. It's access to funds. So the number of people who get funded at the seed level, the number of women, it's a really low number. I'm going to say it's like 8-9%. Women of color is like 3%. I remember that one at the seed level. So if you're not at the seed level, it's pretty hard to get to Series A. And when you get to Series A, the numbers don't go up all that much better for women. So we have to get women into the pipeline. We have to find ways of funding their companies so that they can ultimately be the ones doing the big deals.
Capitalism. More men are capitalists than women. I'm serious about that, but I think that has a lot to do with just value systems that are coming into the space. As somebody who's been impacted by the justice system, I wouldn't touch the plant in that capacity. So I dare question how many women who know that this is federally illegal stay away from it for that reason as well, because people don't visit women in prisons. People visit men in prison. Kids go hungry. So, you know, there's a lot of thought that's probably, I would imagine that there's a lot more thought going into these conversations, especially as we've transitioned into conversations about social equity and how do we empower people of color to participate. I would say that some people don't participate, and women in particular, out of fear. Who's going to hold the home down if something were to happen? So that's what
But you also have to remember that, you know, it was only in the 50s that we were allowed to have credit cards under our own names, right? So we haven't been in the workforce all that many years to amass the kinds of fortune and power that are out there. But right now is this really unique time for us and a super big opportunity, I think, because we've been in business for a couple generations, as we're getting into our third, and so we have amassed some funds, and as our parents are leaving us, they're leaving us with a lot of money. So the biggest wealth transfer in history is taking place in the baby boom generation as they inherit their parents' wealth and they have their own wealth.
White people.
Yes, that's
for
true.
white people.
That is true. But at any rate, it has to do too, in that sense, yes. But also education is another area. Women have achieved education, so they've got money, they've got education, and they have business acumen that they haven't had before. And, you know, I agree that there's women of color have been disproportionately affected, but that's true across the board, right? Mm-hmm. And that also has to be addressed within it.
So how do we, funding is a big thing to fix, right? That seems to be huge. What are some of the other things that we can do to specifically support women-owned and minority-owned companies in our communities? Other than buying your products, because we can vote with our dollars, right? But what are some of these other big things that do you think that we need to move or reshape or change so that women-owned and minority-owned companies can thrive?
Well, one thing I think we should do is we should set some goals and we should set some standards and we should ask the industry to match us there. Because when you do measure things and you do set goals, obviously you can make something of them and you can find out what's happening there. We can encourage women to mentor other women. You know, there's a lot of things that have been done by corporate America in the last, 10, 20 years, that they've looked at that we could apply to our own industry and start holding ourselves to the fire, our own feet to the fire.
I would say, similar to what we were all saying, but help develop programs like social equity for women. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're doing it for race, this is obviously a problem that we have. I read at the Harvard Review, the Harvard Business Review, that women are asked, when they're looking to raise money for their businesses, what about your losses? When men are asked about their gains. And these are facts. This was just printed. So it's it's also, and these are women looking to be CEOs, right? And start up their own business. And if they can't raise money, they don't have the banking support, how are they going to do it? So if we were to start also focusing on social equity for women, I think it would be a big push in the right direction.
I think another thing is internally, the female leaders, and I definitely know and assume that all the women that have already spoken here do this, is that internally in their own companies or organizations, they mentor other women. Yes, they may mentor other men and other, subordinates or rising stars, but when you project diversity, it becomes even more amplified. So then these individuals you're mentoring are going out and projecting your brand image of diversity and inclusivity to others as well. Another study I just read said that, this is a really interesting thing about women and men, is that there is psychopaths, for example, make really good CEOs, right? It's people say that sociopaths and psychopaths make really good CEOs, but only specifically with men. With women, they make women look a little crazy, and I don't know why, but maybe it's a way that we emit these different things, but that is so indicative of how people see, oh, there's the bitch versus there's the boss, right? So we have to change that.
So, to echo what Priscilla said, that women were 50% of the population. So, in cities like Los Angeles, where Latinos are not 40% or 30%, yeah, we're 51% of the city of Los Angeles, we're 38% of the entire state. But in cities like Los Angeles, it would be nice to see those numbers reflective. In cities like Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, other cities, of course, that's where white women, who are the majority of the populace there, should have equity programs that fit in for their specific needs. So one of the things, I'm a consultant, so one of the things that I do is I never turn anybody away. I have conversations with as many women as possible. I take lunch dates, coffee dates. I'm driving all around the city to ensure that we're empowering as many people with just information. I mean, sometimes I tell people, you shouldn't be over here. Let's steer you in this direction or whatnot. But I think mentoring women in particular, especially, I'm in my 40s, I don't have any kids. That's something that is a necessity for me to be able to do to ensure that other women can thrive in this community.
So let's also talk from an environmental perspective, because that's how the last panel ended. I'm sure as business owners, you have your feet held to the fire to maximize your ROI, right? And yet, where does the environment fit into that? And what are some of the best practices that you've come across, and maybe you've even implemented in your own companies, to lower your carbon footprint as you're trying to get these products out the door?
Do you guys like me to go first again? No problem. Well, let me start off by telling you guys the hurdles, first of all, that we have to go through, which makes it difficult for us to be successful in what we're about to discuss. In Nevada, I have a 26,000 square foot cultivation production facility. I would have loved to put, panels to conserve energy on the roof, but Nevada is very smart and said, no, you cannot do that. You have to go through our one source of energy. I'm going to tell you, it's all business, right? I think it cost me $500,000 to break the concrete rope, to bring in all the power necessary to operate a 26,000 square foot facility, and it took me a $202,000 check just to move on my file, just so they can sit on it. So these are hurdles that we deal with every day. It's not like we want to, have, better practices and incorporate, go green, things like this, but there's certain things that do not allow us to, and this is just my experience. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult. People can't even go to a bank and try and get funding to be able to do that. So, that's my experience.
So, Leaf Spice Snoop is essentially a packaged good. So, it breaks my heart a little bit every time we sell a box of Leafs because due to Colorado, Nevada, Washington, California regulations, they need to be in a opaque, resealable, child-proof container. So all those things combined result in
extra packaging.
Exactly, like excessive packaging that people kind of just toss. Or luckily for our brand, we found in our research that people actually keep our boxes, and they actually try and resell them on eBay for like a collection set. And I didn't believe it until I actually saw them on eBay selling for like hundreds of dollars. And so this was not our intention, but I believe that our brand is making less waste. We're still cutting down the same number of trees. We're still using polyurethane and all this plastic stuff. Luckily, we are moving towards, we have done some R&D in China for some tins that will be recyclable as well as cut down on the amount of packaging. So when you open it, you directly get the flower as opposed to having to open a box and then getting your, bud thing open, right? So luckily for us, we've been able to do that R&D, and we'll be implementing that more pulled back kind of packaging in the future. But again, I think it's the regulations that really dictate that we need to spend all of this packaging effort into like packaging just an eighth of flour. It's ridiculous.
It makes me cry every time I see it.
Janine, what's your company doing?
I was going to say, we're still growing, so we mostly outsource. We're pretty tech focused, so we outsource a lot of the technology. We create our stuff, so we don't make a lot of waste. We're more about waste and reuse. We also think that one Anabi bag that'll last you 10 years is better than 4,000 baggies that'll be in the landfill. So it's reuse, it's quality, right?
I'm Vanna-ing over here for you.
And we are going to have the lockable version so that you'll be able to use it and going back to the, to the dispensaries and stuff. We think about that. I don't know how we'll articulate it as we go forward, but it's definitely something we want to do.
This is how a female consumer happens. We share. Anything you want to add before we go to questions?
I mean, in terms of what do, we don't use a lot of paper. Dr. Cross is into repurposing pretty much everything. So if you were to go into our office and our lab, you would see some very interesting spaces that were created by her, utilizing a lot of just repurposed wood. So not very much, but in terms of the product that we manage, which is the Pot Labs products, those are all eco-friendly, but they don't have to go through the same stringent requirements that the ladies to the right of me do, just because, well, Dr. Cross is a PhD and is utilizing her PhD to do research, so the product that leaves our office doesn't have the same regulations as theirs.
All right, question.
Yes. Wow. Well, I say is wow. I think this has been a very, very insightful session. Here's the question I have. Because I'm a 19-year combat veteran, I often wonder when we as veterans, especially females that are coming home transition, boys and male, what opportunities you can provide the veterans who are coming from transition, trying to find work, one transition in NYC to the cannabis space. Do you or will you have opportunities for those veterans so that when they come home, we can now put them to work? There's a lot of homeless veterans, females that I've been seeing, that I work with. Felicia and some know about that. I'd like to know, what are you going to do to help us in the name of thanking us for our service?
So for the folks at home, how can businesses employ veterans, male and female, in the cannabis industry?
I'll answer first if you guys don't mind. I actually, when I applied for the licenses in LA County, Linwood, I did community outreach with my people to let them know exactly what I was going to do. That I wasn't going to create this big warehouse, and their kids were going to walk right by it after school. I mean, I had to literally explain to the people what my plans were. And in doing so, I also said, and it's in my agreement with the city, that I would hire veterans because I want to involve everyone. And to everyone's defense, we've learned as a business owner, I actually enjoy hiring older people because they're so diligent and great at their work that there is no downfall to me hiring them. So I can only speak for myself, but if anything, yes, I have promised the city of Linwood to hire veterans as well.
Yeah, so I think there's this really good case study of, I think it was a dispensary, I can't recall which one, that posted a really, it was just black text on a white billboard that said, do you need a job? Are you homeless? Are you a veteran? Do you need a job for cannabis or whatever? Call us, email us your resume. And it was so effective. I think over 5,000 applicants applied, and they picked one, unfortunately, because they only had one spot, right? I think those methods are great to bring attention to the issue. But to further that, I think what we need to do is actually physically go to, veteran, like the VA or like these areas where the veterans can reconvene more frequently to finally get in with that community. Something that we personally do, I don't think there are any veterans in my company, unfortunately, but we do partner. There will be. Yeah, we're gonna talk. But we do, like, for example, one of my partners that we work with in another state, I can't say which right now, he is an ex-Navy SEAL. So, and he's told me about like what he's been through and how he tries to hire in his production firm a bunch of, his buddies or Navy SEALs or other veterans. So in that way, even though it's not directly, I feel as if I'm helping kind of, not really. I need to do it myself in our own company as well. Yeah.
And on Monday, October the 22nd, in Los Angeles, it's going to be our first expungement and resume clinic. So I actually have some jobs that are available and some job descriptions from a few brands. And then let's also talk, because I have a meeting in the coming weeks, like a luncheon with a bunch of brands to kind of talk about the specific things that we need from them so we can figure out how I'm trying to double dip. So like, how do we get money from the city? And then how do we get money from private funding simultaneously? So if that looks like giving them providing jobs and creating a better workforce, then we always talk life, so no biggie.
So I'll just say, I worked for the government. I was a consultant, so I had an office at the Pentagon for a year, and they never drug tested me, by the way. But one of the greatest things, of working there was seeing all the vets and working with them, and there's lots of them there at the Pentagon. And they're the kinds of people, when they see some uneven sidewalk, they bend down and make it even, and when we get on the metro, I remember once there was a woman, and I was going to try to run in and get her a seat because she couldn't sit well, and these vets ran ahead of me, and I was going to be mad at them, but they ran in and got the seat before I did, so for her, which is really great. So I've got a real fondness for veterans and for our people who serve. But what I wanted to say about it is that so I consult. What I do, because I'm a marketing branding person, I've consulted with a bunch of people who serve veterans. I continue to do that on a pro bono basis. But also I am the vice chair of NCIA's Marketing and Advertising Committee. And one of the subcommittees is the Social Justice Committee. And so I work with them to encourage them to do programs and to get involved in social justice issues and these kinds of issues. So we do that too.
You gotta cut him off.
Yeah. I'm getting a signal in the back. Can I have one more question from the audience, folks? Yes? I'm gonna go over here. Love you. Gonna go over here. Woman in the blue, I think that's blue.
that are getting their foot
Yeah. So for the folks at home, question about the social equity program and how it sounds like it still has problems that we need to work on. Anybody want to tackle that?
Well, I always like to tell people this tidbit of information that in 2016, while I was at a birthday party for a friend of mine, her wife happened to be the senior mayor, or the senior advisor to the mayor of Oakland, and she started off her question, or she you know, we're sitting there, we're smoking a joint. She asks me, "Hey, you know our friend Steve D'Angelo?" That's how the question got started about social equity and removing a barrier. It had nothing to do with black and brown faces. It had to do with making sure that Steve D'Angelo, who has a cannabis conviction, could participate in the marketplace. So in terms of social equity, it's all in theory. That's why campaigns like this that we're pushing in particular are so important, because we're dealing with a lot of privilege. I mean, we're one of the richest cities in the world, but we also have the largest prison population in our city, not even in our state, in our city. So when we talk about all of those types of things, we're talking about such a wide field with disparity, and we're talking about black and brown people who can't go to get a loan the same as other individuals. So in terms of the social equity program that we currently have, we have to push it a lot further because it's only dealing with a certain subsect of the conversation. I don't know if that helps, but I mean, there's just a lot of work, and if you're available on Friday morning, we are going to City Hall and we are challenging the commission and the mayor to do better by those of us who live here, by the citizens who are demanding it. We're not requesting it anymore, we're demanding it.
Thank you. Okay, so before I release all of our fabulous panelists to questions from folks in the audience, I want you to bear with me. I need a group photo of all of these fabulous people. So folks, stay on the stage. If you've also been a panel, come on up, and then can somebody with a cell phone stand in that row and get a group photo? And then after we